Bennylyn Aquino was born in 1995 in the Philippines. The girl's family lived in extreme poverty, but this did not affect Bennylyn's character. She was very popular, kind, and loved by everyone. The girl was determined to receive an education for a better start in life, and her family supported her wholeheartedly, saving on other necessities to help her study. In 2015, on a dating website, 19-year-old Venelyn met a 40-year-old British man named Lexington Burke. He earned his living by renting out apartments and spaces, which allowed him to leave the country for several months. He traveled to the Philippines to be with Venelyn and witnessed firsthand the dire conditions her family was living in. However, this did not deter him from Venelyn, and on July 28, 2018, they tied the knot. A month later, on August 19th, their daughter was born, and they named her Jellica. By their daughter's first birthday, the entire family had moved to the United Kingdom. This was the first time Bennylyn had left the Philippines, and she hoped for a brighter future in the new country. She worked tirelessly and sent money back home to support her family. By the end of 2020, the marriage between Bennylyn and Lexington fell apart, and she moved with her children into temporary housing in Kingswood, 5 kilometers away from Bristol. The people who also lived in temporary accommodations understood her situation and provided assistance to the young mother, offering food and other necessities. Friends from Bristol also visited and supported her in every way they could. Despite the end of their marriage, Bennylyn and Lexington managed to arrange custody of their daughter Jellica without any scandals. Several months passed, and at the end of February 2021, Lexington arrived on the scheduled day to spend time with Jellica, but neither the child nor the mother were at home. He tried to contact his ex-wife several times but received no response. She didn't answer messages or pick up the phone when he called. Social workers also attempted to reach Bennylyn as they couldn't establish contact with her, and she had missed a scheduled meeting. This behavior was very unlike Bennylyn, and Lexington grew increasingly worried, eventually involving the police. On March 1st, the police initiated a search for 25-year-old Bennylyn and her 2 daughters. It's important to note that among the victims in this case was a 7-year-old girl, whose name is not mentioned to protect her identity. Some news sources briefly mentioned that this was Bennylyn's older daughter. The police began their investigation and quickly found a lead. Witnesses mentioned that Bennylyn might have visited Scotland over the weekend. Police reviewed surveillance camera footage and located the car in which Bennylyn had left. The driver was captured on the surveillance camera while refueling the vehicle. Investigators reached out to the Scottish police for assistance in locating the car. It turned out that the car was registered to Andrew Innes, a 50-year-old software developer who had no prior legal issues. Based on the video evidence, it seemed that Andrew had traveled from Dundee to pick up Bennylyn and her daughters and take them to his place. The police were not yet aware of this sequence of events. Meanwhile, Bennylyn managed to find time every day to communicate with her sister Sheila, who remained in the Philippines. Despite the different time zones, they chatted with each other through video calls daily. On Thursday, February 18th, as usual, Bennylyn shared her plans with her sister. She told Sheila that they were in Andrew's car, all together heading to Scotland to Dundee. Sheila asked if she could see Andrew, and Bennylyn turned the camera to show the man behind the wheel. Sheila and Andrew exchanged a few words, and Sheila felt that Bennylyn was very excited about the upcoming trip. She also noticed that Bennylyn hadn't taken any travel bags with her, indicating that the trip wasn't supposed to be lengthy. 2 days after that conversation, and after Bennylyn had arrived in Scotland, Sheila began to worry because her sister wasn't responding to her messages. She then reached out to Andrew. He reassured her that everything was fine with Bennylyn and that he had driven her to a cafe in Glasgow, where another man she had met online was waiting for her. Andrew added that Bennylyn had simply stayed at his house for a few days to avoid her ex-husband, who wanted full custody of Jellica, and to deport Bennylyn from the country. Sheila contacted Andrew a few more times, but each time he assured her that Bennylyn was okay, Scotland was a safe country, and there was nothing to worry about. 4 days later, he informed Sheila that the man from the cafe had messaged him and assured her that Bennylyn was settling in well. After that, Andrew added that he would delete all contacts with Bennylyn from his phone to protect himself and her, in case the police searched his home and tried to find her. Sheila suspected and requested that Andrew send her a video of Bennylyn as proof of her well-being, and he sent her a video, although it turned out to be an old recording. On March 5th at 15:20, the police approached Andrew Innes's house. They had no knowledge of Andrew's correspondence with Sheila or how he had met Venelyn. However, they were aware that the car they had seen on the surveillance cameras was parked outside the house. The officers knocked on the door, and the homeowner opened it just slightly before refusing them entry, claiming that he was self-isolating. He mentioned that his daughter had just taken a bath and needed to get dressed. Yet through a crack in the door, the police noticed a fully dressed young girl inside the house. Their instincts raised concerns. Credit is due to the officers who, despite lacking evidence against the man, insisted on entering the house. Once inside, they encountered a messy environment, indicating ongoing kitchen renovations. In the living room, a 7-year-old girl was sitting, watching cartoons. While one officer was questioning Andrew, another discreetly asked the girl if Andrew was truly her father. She responded that he wasn't her father and wasn't a relative at all. Meanwhile, Andrew repeated to the other officer the same story he had told Sheila, that he had driven Bennylyn to the cafe and hadn't seen her since. The police officers were skeptical of his words, pressed him further, and unexpectedly, Andrew blurted out, "I killed her. She's under the floor. We had a fight, and I killed her." When asked about Jellica's whereabouts, he claimed she was with her mother, as he couldn't handle the constantly crying child. Following this shocking confession, Andrew Innes was arrested, and the 7-year-old girl was taken to a safe location. On the next day, March 6th, Andrew was charged with the murders of Bennylyn and Jellica. While the police were figuring out how to extract the bodies, they began piecing together the facts of the case. Andrew, a 50-year-old software developer, had never been in trouble with the law before. He was born in Germany on a military base in 1970. At the age of 24, he moved to Dundee and worked at DMA Design after completing university, contributing to the creation of various games. He was highly regarded at work and considered a very quiet and pleasant individual by his friends. His job allowed him to travel extensively. During one of his trips, he met a woman from Japan and married her. They soon became parents, but their marriage fell apart in 2019, leading to his deportation back to Britain. Here, he registered on 34 dating sites, including Filipino Cupid, which Venelyn also used. As he was technologically savvy, he created a tool that narrowed down search results to only women with small children. He then collected data about these women in a spreadsheet, sorting them by age, weight, and height. His preference was for petite women with young children, aged 25 to 29. This is how he met Venelyn, who perfectly fit his criteria. Initially, they exchanged messages and later communicated through video calls. He offered her a job as a public relations specialist and temporary housing during work, but she declined, suggesting she could work remotely from Bristol if he wanted to hire her. Andrew asked Venelyn for intimate photos, but she refused. However, this didn't seem to deter her, as on February 12th, she agreed to meet him in person. The man's search queries revealed that after they had agreed to meet, Andrew looked into the homicide rate in Scotland, the use of chloroform, and hiding places under the floor. Despite strict travel restrictions due to the pandemic, he drove 400 miles from Dundee to Kingswood. However, upon arrival, he found out that he wouldn't be allowed to stay at the temporary accommodation arranged by Venelyn, nor could he check into a hotel. Venelyn told her sister that she felt sorry for him to sleep in his car during winter after such a long journey. Additionally, she had always wanted to see Scotland, so she agreed to go with him and stay at his place over the weekend. It seemed she didn't anticipate any disagreements with Andrew, assuming he would take her back if anything went wrong. Otherwise, it would have been a costly Uber trip, assuming she could even convince a driver to undertake such a journey. In any case, Venelyn traveled to Scotland with Andrew. They took many photos in Dundee, exploring the city and visiting landmarks. However, they suddenly vanished from all radars after that point. Meanwhile, the police officers were faced with the task at hand, finding the bodies. First and foremost, they consulted with criminalists, anthropologists, archaeologists, and geologists to determine if Bennylyn and Jellica could indeed be buried under the floor as Andrew claimed. It took the police 2 weeks to excavate the house's foundation, during which they confirmed Andrew's words. On March 19th, at a depth of 3 feet, they discovered the bodies. Bennylyn's former husband, Lexington, informed Sheila about this horrifying discovery. prompting her to share the devastating news of her sister and niece's deaths with their parents. After the discovery of the bodies, it was time to conduct the autopsy, which revealed horrifying acts of cruelty inflicted on the mother and daughter. Venelyn had been repeatedly struck on the head with a heavy object and stabbed in the chest. Andrew claimed that this wasn't planned and that Venelyn had attacked him with a sushi knife. However, police evidence contradicted his version. On February 23rd, he was caught on surveillance cameras buying gravel and tools, including a hammer, the same hammer he used to beat her. According to investigators, what actually happened is as follows. When Venelyn was in the kitchen preparing food, Andrew attacked her, repeatedly hitting her on the head with a hammer. He then went to his office to retrieve a long knife, which he described as a samurai sword. He returned to the kitchen and struck her with it. He proceeded to hit her a few more times with the knife handle and the hammer, wrapped her body in plastic, tarp, and a blanket, and placed it under the kitchen floor. The crime likely occurred on February 23rd, the same day he went to the store for tools. All of this happened in front of the 7-year-old girl. After killing Venelyn, he kept Jellica alive for 2 or 3 days, during which he repeatedly assaulted her. He then strangled her by pressing on her mouth and neck. He wrapped Jellica's naked body in plastic bags and placed it alongside her mother under the floor. Andrew explained that he did this because he wanted them to be together, and it seemed logical to him to place Jellica next to her mother. After the murders, he had to explain to the 7-year-old girl where Venelyn and Jellica were, so he told her they were in the hospital. Officers who interrogated him recalled that he showed no remorse for his crimes and seemed to relish in self-pity. The trial began in Edinburgh on January 31st, 2023. Innes admitted to killing Venelyn and her daughter, but insisted that the crime wasn't premeditated and denied any violence, although his DNA was found on Jellica's body, and both Jellica's and Innes's DNA were found on a condom in the trash at his house. On the 3rd day of the trial, he decided to change his version of events. He recounted that Venelyn's face reminded him of his ex-girlfriend, and her figure resembled his ex-wife. According to his account, the girl broke up with him, sending him a message, and his wife had a negative attitude toward him. These memories upset him, leading him to attack Venelyn and beat her until she stopped moving. As evidence that the crime wasn't planned, he argued that a planned murder would have gone more smoothly. He also claimed that the hammer he had purchased turned out to be an unsuitable weapon. The majority of the trial's focus was on the suspect's mental state. A psychiatrist met with Innes 8 times after his arrest and provided testimony on the 4th day of the trial. The psychiatrist believed that Innes harbored resentment towards his ex-girlfriends and wife, and somehow Venelyn reminded him of them, which angered him and led to him being unable to control his growing rage. Although he claimed that the girls treated him poorly, it was more likely the other way around. It became evident that he had a strong need for control when he admitted to becoming very angry when his ex-wife got a haircut that he didn't approve of. Finally, the accused attempted to blame steroids for the killings. He had been diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which led to hospitalization in February 2021 and a prescription for steroids to alleviate symptoms. The defense asked the psychiatrist if the suspect could have experienced psychosis due to steroids, especially because he had taken an increased dose. However, the doctor confidently stated that if someone was experiencing psychosis, they wouldn't go about their day as usual, and people around them would notice. Therefore, the purchase of a hammer didn't fit into this version of events. The psychiatrist emphasized that while medication can have such side effects, they are extremely rare, and most of his colleagues had never encountered such cases in their entire careers. However, the doctor knew that Innes had learned about this phenomenon from his family members when they visited him in prison and decided that it might apply to his situation. Several specialists also suggested that he might have had autism, but the judge argued that it doesn't make him predisposed to violence or diminish his responsibility for his actions. One of the most heart-wrenching moments in the trial occurred when a pre-recorded conversation with the 7-year-old girl found alive in Innes's house was played. It turned out that the murder of Venelyn had happened before her eyes. The girl described how Innes had a heavy hammer with which he struck Venelyn. She attempted to call the police but couldn't speak. After her mother's murder, Innes held the girls captive for several days and repeatedly assaulted them. Then, when they were playing hide-and-seek and she wanted to peek into the bathroom, Innes suddenly closed the door in front of her. After that, She never saw Jellica again and assumed that he had killed her there. The girl was devastated that she couldn't understand what was happening and blamed herself for not being able to save Bennylyn and Jellica. She also described scenes of horrific violence that she and Jellica endured in Innes's house. She referred to these instances as work because after each incident, the man would give her money. For instance, once he gave her £2 and 10 pence. Innes bound her hands with black fur handcuffs and used a sock as a makeshift gag. To prevent her from escaping, he tied a rope to the door and attached it to another door, ensuring that she couldn't open it. Innes, however, vehemently denied ever touching the girl. He claimed that he wouldn't use a sock as a gag, as there were hundreds of more suitable items in the house. Yet DNA evidence spoke the truth. DNA from the girl was found on one of the socks in his house and on the handcuffs. Furthermore, she tested positive for chlamydia, just like Innes. Later in the trial, Innes confessed to the jury that if the police had come to his house 24 hours later, they would have found her body next to Bennylyn and Jellica. The facts revealed during the trial were so horrifying that the jurors were offered the assistance of a psychologist to cope with what they saw and heard. After 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered the verdict of guilty for the murders and assaults. Innes was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 36 years before he could be eligible for parole. Experts are convinced that these couldn't have been Innes's only crimes. The Scottish police contacted other countries Innes had visited and Interpol, but as of now, they haven't been able to identify other victims. Bennylyn's family started a campaign to support a charitable organization that helps Filipinos living in the UK, including those who have experienced abuse from their partners. Sheila admits that she still can't believe the loss of her sister and niece, and she continues to dial Bennylyn's number just to hear her voice.